Coming in from the cold, a flurry of diplomatic maneuvers raises hopes of a rapprochement between the West and Iran. Tehran is expected to prepare a package of proposals to diffuse tensions over its nuclear activities. But is this enough to build trust? Or is the West determined to thwart Iran's nuclear ambitions at any price? This is Inside Story. Hello, I'm Jane Dutton. Welcome to the programme. Relations between the West and Iran appear to be warming as Tehran offers to limit its nuclear programme. The Iranians are said to have put together a new proposal that would mean it stops making near weapons-grade nuclear material in return for sanctions being relaxed. Caroline Malone has this report.
Movement on the diplomatic front, while reports emerge that Iran is working on proposals to show it's not enriching uranium to weapons grade. On Tuesday, British Foreign Minister William Hague said the UK and Iran are appointing chargé d'affaires, a step towards reopening embassies in Tehran and London. People in Tehran are pleased relations appear to be improving.
I think it's a good idea that the British embassy reopen in Iran. Having relations with any country, even if it is limited, is a good idea.
In the past, the US and the UK have had a hostile approach towards us, and they still do. But I think anyway it is better to have relations with them, and the reopening of the British embassy is not a bad idea.
It's the biggest change since this. People angry at sanctions imposed against Iran attacked the British embassy in Tehran. After that happened, the UK withdrew all its staff, fearing for their safety, and ended diplomatic ties. But Hague has emphasised that sanctions against Iran will remain until there's actual movement on its nuclear policies.
A substantial change in British or Western policies requires a substantive change in that programme. However, we must test the Iranian government's sincerity to the full, and it is important that our channels of communication are open for that.
Hague met Iran's foreign minister at the United Nations last month. Mohammad Zarif said he hopes there will be an agreement on Tehran's nuclear programme soon. But relations may be thawing with the US as well. Just after the UN General Assembly, Iran's President Hassan Rouhani spoke to US President Barack Obama on the phone, the highest level contact between those countries in 30 years. On his return to Tehran, Rouhani faced some criticism from people who are against US relations. Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei said on Sunday that he backs Rouhani's diplomatic efforts, but he doesn't trust the US. Even so, Iran has agreed to talks with 6 world powers on its nuclear program in Geneva next week. Talks that will include the United States and their renewed associate, Britain. Caroline Malone, Al Jazeera.
Well, for more on the warming of relations, I'm joined by our 3 guests. From Tehran, Zadek Zibakalam, Professor of Political Science at Tehran University. From Boston, Jim Walsh, an international security expert and research associate at MIT. And from London, Mehrdad Konsari, former Iranian diplomat and a political analyst at the Centre for Arab and Iranian Studies in London. Let's first get the Iranian perspective on this. Mehrdad Konsari, why is Rouhani extending the hand of friendship?
Well, I think in my view, Iran's international isolation coupled with its dire economic situation, which has been a result of the sanctions, has created the situation whereby the continuation of the previous policies was totally untenable. And I think the decision was made by the Iranian leadership to want to try a different approach in order to resurrect Iran's position both internationally and to try and help its situation domestically.
You say this is a decision made by the leadership, and when we're talking about leadership, how unified are they on this?
Well, I think that, like every country, really, you have pros and cons for many issues, but the key decisions in Iran are made by the supreme leader, and of course in the aftermath of the election, which again represented public sentiment which demanded change. I think the Supreme Leader saw that and has also adjusted his policies or his previous stances. And I think that by and large, the new president and the Supreme Leader are anxious that a path much different than what was pursued be pursued at this time, though obviously they all have reservations as to how this new policy could pan out and how potentially damaging it could be for the Islamic Republic. And this is a cry that some of the people who don't wish to see this course being pursued are expressing at this time, though they are generally muted as this policy is being pursued.
Zadik Zibakalam, what are you making of what seems to be warming of relations at the moment?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. The mood in Iran is a mood of hope and wishful thinking that Rouhani will be able to succeed, because sanctions really have made Iranian, particularly ordinary Iranian, to suffer. But I must emphasize that it's not only Iran that is seeking an alternative path to what had been going on during the past 8 years. I believe that the Western, particularly the United States, they are seeking a new approach because they realize that only Iranian people have been suffering as a result of sanctions. The sanctions have not really affected the Islamic regime per se, and there are many voices in the West, in the United States, against the sanctions. And it appears that only Chinese, Arabs, United Arab Emirates, and China, they all have been benefiting from the sanctions, and the West is nowhere near to its objective in forcing Islamic regime to back down, and only Iranian people have been suffering.
Tell us a little bit more about the impact it's had on those on the street.
Well, obviously, the private sector has suffered tremendously because of the sanctions, and there have been all sorts of shortages, particularly medicine. Western leaders have always maintained that we have not prevented the medicine going to Iran. Iranian leaders have said quite contrary, that the West, that they have been so unethical with regard to the sanctions that even they have barred in the vital medicine from Iranian. So I think you can feel, you can see, you can sense that ordinary Iranians are tremendously suffering because of the sanctions.
Jim, you were nodding when you heard that sanctions could possibly be behind this. I mean, clearly that's your viewpoint.
Well, yes and no, Jane. I think partly sanctions have contributed to this, but there's domestic economic policies that contributed to this as well. And it's hard to disentangle which is just bad economic planning and which is sanctions. But I agree with both my colleagues. I agree with my Iranian colleague that the sanctions have caused pain and sometimes unintended consequences. All that stuff around the medicines and medical devices, that's not what U.S. lawmakers want or intended, but it's been an unintended consequence. But they haven't achieved a change in the nuclear program either. So I think Rouhani, when he was in New York a couple of weeks back, and I had a chance to spend some time with him, it's clear they want to move forward. And I agree with my Iranian colleague that sanctions alone aren't going to resolve the nuclear issue. So both sides have reason to want to make progress if they can.
Yes, Jim, I believe you spent at least 4 hours with him. I'm intrigued to know what you spoke about and if you believe that these overtures are legitimate.
Oh, I think they're absolutely serious. There's no doubt about that. You know, in international relations, sometimes people talk about cheap talk versus costly signaling. And so some people have said that Rouhani is, you know, he's a smiling guy and this is all just cosmetic. That's an example that if that was true, that would be cheap talk. But the things he said in New York make clear that he's putting his credibility on the line. So this just isn't cheap talk. He's actually putting himself out there. I think he was, not unlike Obama, elected on hope and change, and needs to come back to the Iranian people and the Iranian establishment within 6 months or a year and say, look, you voted for change. Here's what I've been able to produce. Here's my deliverable. And so I think he definitely wants to move forward on a number of fronts, not just the nuclear, but in other fronts as well, and is looking to move forward. And the U.S. would like to move forward, but I've seen this movie before. As a friend of mine says, these two countries, Iran and the U.S., never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. So even though both, I think, are inching towards some progress here, and it has the best potential we've had in 2 decades, lots of things can go wrong in both countries, so nothing is ever done when it concerns these two.
Should we talk a little bit, Mehrdad, about what could possibly go wrong? You seem to agree with the movie analogy. We've been here before.
Yes, I think that is absolutely right. The problem right now is the fact that the appropriate gestures have been made. The diplomatic tone has been changed. And there is a general positiveness on both sides. I mean, both, not just the United States, but the 5+1 and Iran in approaching the new round of meetings that they have scheduled. But at the end of the day, as we approach the 15th and 16th of October, when this meeting is supposed to take place, all these gestures, all these, you might say, goodwill that has been expressed will mean nothing unless there is some explicit change in the position which the Iranian government must, introduce in the discussions. The fact is that while the sanctions have not forced the Iranian government to change its nuclear policy, but it is a fact that the West can sit matters out a lot more than the Iranian people or the Iranian government can.
Because they've got them against the ropes, haven't they?
Exactly. The point is that the Iranian regime cannot afford for the sanctions policy regime to continue as is indefinitely. And that is one of the reasons why they have changed the tune and they have changed their entire, you might say, approach for the better, which is something that should be welcomed and, of course, taken to heart. But the fact is that unless they deliver, unless they do offer something that means, that these negotiations can look good, then the consequences will be very bad, because Mr. Rouhani will just as quickly lose credibility at home as he will abroad, and we will be back to a situation where, things could get out of hand, and, if they continue with the nuclear policy in an accelerated way, then that opens up a whole host of other problems that, everybody is trying to
country
avoid.
Can ill afford. Let me bring in Zadok here. I mean, Rouhani says that Iran has a precise plan to present in Geneva, and the Iranian parliamentary speaker Ali Larijani also said that Iran has more enriched uranium than it needs and plans to use that as a bargaining chip. Can you give us some kind of sense of what sort of package we're looking at here that Iran is going to present?
I think more than the details of what Iran is offering and what the West is offering, whether or not Iran is prepared to shut down Fordow, the important nuclear site near Qom, or whether or not Iran has agreed that it will end 20% enrichment, etc., etc. I think more than the details of what Iran is offering, what the West is offering, is confidence building. The important point is that the West does not trust Iran, and Iranian leaders do not trust the West. the Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei said it only last week that he doesn't trust the United States, and he's not alone. There are many the Iranians within the Iranian leadership, within the Revolutionary Guard, inside the Iranian Parliament, and other the area of the power, that they genuinely believe that United States is only after regime change, and nuclear issue, human rights, etc., are only excuses by the United States to put Iran under pressure to bring about the downfall of the Islamic regime. So I think it is vitally important that two sides begin to trust one another. Jim Walsh, our colleague from United States, is quite right. There is a catalogue of missing, really, golden opportunity that has erupted between Tehran and Washington. So I believe that it's very important that we move, both sides move towards trusting each other.
Jim, what do you think is going to bring trust to both sides?
Well, I think it's, actions speak louder than words. And so I think a new negotiating position from Iran, which I expect, based on what I heard in New York, I heard flexibility on a variety of dimensions, level of enrichment, number of facilities, number of centrifuges, how much each centrifuge produces. These are things that are fungible and flexible and can be subject to negotiation. So I heard some encouraging news there. But equally important, it has to be reciprocal. And so the U.S. is going to have to meet a serious offer from the Iranians with serious sanctions relief. Now, I think neither side is looking for a grand bargain in which every issue is solved. I don't even think they're going to solve all the nuclear issues, but over the next 6 months or so, 6 months to a year, they're going to try to arrive at least at a core initial nuclear agreement that can get the ball rolling, that can build some momentum, to build some confidence, as my Iranian colleague has suggested, and build some trust. But to get that first deal, the U.S. is going to have to come through. Again, people doubt whether the U.S. will hold its side of the bargain.
Sorry, Jim, excuse me jumping in here. It's pretty hard at the moment if you look at the desire to raise the debt ceiling, the government shutdown, and the fact that Congress wants more sanctions.
Yes, it's absolutely true. Now, we've got an agreement that Congress will not try to pass any more sanctions for at least till after the Geneva meeting, but that's not that far away. But I think the president's going to have to take some leadership here and say, listen to the American Congress, do not undermine the best opportunity we've had in 20 years for us to make progress on a vital national interest, which is the nuclear program. So the president's going to have to show some leadership and step in. But I agree. This is one of the reasons why I'm concerned. I'm concerned about, will Congress follow through and do what it's supposed to do? And back in Tehran, I worry that political opponents of the president they're quiet now, but they'll come out later for sure. So that's why this is a difficult and fragile process, but trust is key, and we got to just put one foot in front of each other and keep on moving down this road.
Okay, now let's take a look at the impact closer ties with the West could have on Iran's neighbours. It is likely to upset Israel, which continues to say Iran should not be trusted. Benjamin Netanyahu even describing Rouhani as a wolf in sheep's clothing. The Gulf countries have also warned Washington against moving too quickly to improve ties with Tehran. Iran is expected to play a vital role in the run-up to the Geneva II conference in helping to provide a settlement to the ongoing war in Syria. And having Iran on side could possibly mean more flexibility from Bashar al-Assad's government. Mehrdad, if you have Iran on board, where do you think this will leave Syria?
Well, I don't think, I think that's a very optimistic scenario when to speculate about having Iran on board when it comes to issues of that nature, when the most critical issue will take a long time for it to be addressed. But at the end of the day, I don't think the Iranians
could be manipulated or encouraged rather to join talks, or that the Western powers might be more confident in having Iran at the table?
I think that is definitely, that would have taken place anyway. Iran would have been offered the table in any negotiation regarding Syria once Ahmadinejad was gone, and it was very likely that Rouhani government would have had a seat. But that is a far cry from getting Iran to actually come in a supportive way for the positions which the West has over a whole array of issues concerning the Middle East. Those issues will remain separate and different so long as this regime continues to pursue policies which it has been pursuing over a long time. The key area right now is, of course, the nuclear, because that is what is of international concern and concerns international security. Iranian policies vis-a-vis other issues will come in later, and that is where Ayatollah Khamenei has always been afraid, because he says, and whilst he has encouraged this, he has not stood against these course of negotiations at present, but he is worried that once you make a concession somewhere, that you will be expected to make concession in other places. But the most important issue, I think, going back to what my other two colleagues were saying, is that the Geneva meeting should not be a failure. If it is not a failure, then it gives and offers time and opportunity for this matter to sort of advance itself and to work towards some sort of resolution.
Okay. I'm going
to.
Sorry, excuse me, jumping in here, and Jim, because I saw you nodding there. I want to continue with this theme of the impact that this is likely to have on neighbours and how concerned they are. Israel must be petrified.
Yes. Well, it's certainly there are a group of people who do not want the U.S. to have better relations with Iran. I think Israel's chief among them. But I think we saw after the Syria authorization. Well, I think their policy has just been sort of a full court press. Just keep pressing. There's not a big strategy here other than just keeping all the pressure on Iran for as long as possible. I think that's a losing strategy for them, and there are people in Israel who think that's a losing strategy for them. But I think that's been the Netanyahu policy. I think the Gulf countries, it's a little more comical and a little trickier. On the one hand, you have the Arab states, the Gulf states, particularly Saudi Arabia, having strong anti-Iranian positions and whispering in Washington's ear, press on Iran, this nuclear stuff is dangerous. And then getting very nervous on the other hand, if there's any talk of military action for what it would do in the region. And so they're trying to play it both ways. I think it's in the other, particularly the Gulf states, but it's in the other states in the region's interest that Iran not end up with a nuclear weapon. And if the P5+1 can start a process that strengthens that non-proliferation position in Iran, then all the region benefits. Israel benefits, the Gulf Arabs benefit, everyone benefits, even though they're going to cry and complain and undermine it all the way to the very end.
Zadik, what are your thoughts on this?
I think Jim is right, and only the Israelis are very much nervous of the rapprochement between Iran and United States. Of course, Gulf state, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, they are also worried about any rapprochement between Iran and United States, but not to the extent that the Israelis are, because Israelis have always felt an existential threat coming from Iran. But if we look at the plus side, if there are rapprochement between Iran and United States, I strongly believe that Iran can cooperate with United States in Afghanistan against Taliban next year when NATO starts withdrawing from Afghanistan. Iran can cooperate with United States to bring some sort of stability and security in Iraq, and surprisingly enough, Iran and United States can also cooperate in Syria, because Iran has realized that Bashar Assad in long term has no prospect to remain in power in Syria. So Iran is also seeking an alternative, if you like, a face-saving solution for Bashar Assad.
Okay, Jim, I mean, if this all works, obviously it's very exciting for all those reasons posed by Zadik there, but it's hard to imagine what the US would have to do if these talks do indeed fail and it doesn't go according to plan.
Well, that's the sort of scary bit, the other side of this. This is all great news, and I think we can get some pretty quick cooperation with Iran on the issue of chemical weapons in Syria, which would be a major victory for all concerned. But because everyone's leaning forward, and because this is the best opportunity we've had in 20 years, and I think it's been said here tonight, If it fails, oh my gosh, right? You know, then that's the second time the elites in Iran would have made a run at negotiations with the U.S., a big run, 2003, 2005 being the earlier example. And if it crashes and burns, those folks are going to be undermined, they're going to be weakened, hardliners will be emboldened. And in the U.S., those political forces that do not want to see a settlement and do want to see regime change, they're going to say, look, we tried negotiation and it failed. We have no other choice but to pursue other options.
Let's leave it on that word of warning, Jim. Sorry, I'm going to have to cut you off there. We've run out of time. Thank you so much to my guests, Sadiq Ziba-Kalam, Jim Walsh and Mehdad Konsari. And thank you for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. If you want, you can send us your feedback. Email your thoughts to insidestory@aljazeera.net. Thanks again for watching. Bye-bye.